Hi there everyone, welcome to this week's video. Today we're going to be discussing Parmenides and Zeno on being. This lesson in particular is really exciting because Parmenides is sometimes cited out of all of the pre-Socratic philosophers that we've discussed up to this point as the first that provides really an argument for his views. Some people claim that Thales or perhaps Heraclitus also have arguments in their text, but here we can see very specifically a kind of argumentative structure, which we'll then see pursued in different ways by Zeno. And Parmenides really asks us to depart from our everyday beliefs and to believe something really radical, species of philosophical views. Honestly, there are views like this expressed all over the world in one way or another, right? But Parmenides wants to say that being, fundamental reality, everything that there is single, it's unitary, it's one thing, right? Oftentimes Parmenides is referred to as a monist, right? So in other words, maybe in our everyday lives, we think that there are chairs and tables and people and fish and animals and cups and all of that, and we imagine them to be really discrete, really different things, right? If you asked how many things are in the world, right, you would probably say more than one, right? But Parmenides is here specifically to challenge you on that belief, to argue that there are not really existing independent things, that all of reality is fundamentally unitary and the same, and we can describe it simply as what is, or the truth, and that when we believe our appearances that there are, all these discrete individual things, then we are in doxa, or mere opinion, or untruth, right? We're following the opinions of other people, we're making ourselves perhaps understandable to them in various ways, right? But Parmenides will insist that the truth is that all of reality is one. Now, this might strike you as, I don't know, very ambitious, very interesting, very difficult, right? How can you establish by a philosophical argument that really all things are one, right? And essentially what we're going to learn is that it all turns on what we might call the principle of sufficient reason, right? Parmenides certainly had none of this terminology. He didn't talk about principles, he didn't talk about sufficient reason, he didn't talk about none of that, right? But what the principle of sufficient reason says is that everything has a reason for being the way that it is, right? And this idea, even if not the exact phrasing or the argument, is going to underlie a lot of the moves that Parmenides makes in his poem. So let's get into it. Parmenides proposes sort of at the beginning of the poem that, you're in a chariot and you're like on a journey, right? And you have a goddess that sees you and bestows upon you two different paths, right? There's the path of truth, of aletheia, right? The A here is an alpha primitive, so aletheia means something like unconcealed, right? You're seeing things the way that they really are. This is the path of truth, right? And then there is, at least apparently, though there are some questions about this second option, right, which is the option of opinion or doxa, right? But what the goddess says is that the second path is not a true path, right? So in the end, right, it would seem kind of contradictory if you're Parmenides and you're saying everything is one, and you're like, well, there's two options, right? There's one and there's many, right? No, if everything is one, you have to insist there are not two paths, right? It's numerically two, but you have to say that there's one, right? So I've tried to distinguish them by making the path of truth here in blue and the false path of opinion here in red, right? What does it mean for it to be a false path, right? So I mean, it's not a real option, like nobody actually believes that there are multiple things, right? What exactly does Parmenides mean here? It's very unclear. Now, Parmenides' argument for the essentially unitary nature of reality is his insistence that being is and that not being is not, right? One way for you to think about this, right? Imagine nothing in your mind, right? It's incredibly difficult. One reason why is because on Parmenides' account, nothing has no qualities, right? It's not like nothing is smooth or rough. It's not like nothing is, a certain length or breadth or something like that, right? Only being is, right? And so, of course, we have instances where we use being to kind of measure nothing, right? One example of that is like I can use a meter stick, and the meter stick is, right? But you can use it to measure distances that are not, right? So, like maybe I will build a bridge here, right? The bridge is not, but you might think at least that it will be, right? But Parmenides wants to take this idea that being is and that not being is not, and to really take it as far and as deeply and as radically as it can possibly go, right? And so what this causes him to do, and in particular if you're looking at your textbook, around B6 is where he makes a lot of these claims, is that change is impossible. Plurality is impossible if you accept that being is and that not being is not, right? Why is that true? Well, because a change has to be caused by something, right? But for something to be caused, for something to come into existence, right, that thing has to have a cause, right? But being is, right? Being is a changeless. Nothing about being ever is instigated by anything else, right? And not being is not. Not being does not exist, right? And so for Parmenides, there is no change, right? Change, we think the world is changing, right? You can do all these examples of motion, right? You can wave your arms around as much as you like, right? But Parmenides is insistent that when we think not just about our appearances, but we think about fundamental reality, then it has to be single, changeless. It has no parts, right? To be broken into parts of things, there has to be a kind of negation, right? My hand is not my heart, right? I have heterogeneous parts, right? You can't just replace my left hand with my right hand, right? I would have my thumb on the, opposite side of my hand and so on. And so Parmenides wants to say, okay, things may appear that way, right? You may have appearances that change all the time, right? And give the appearance of constant change, right? Maybe the sort of picture that you arrive at in Heraclitus, right? But if you know the truth, if you know fundamental reality, then you know that ultimately those changes and those differences that you posit as part of reality, you cannot explain them. You cannot have any sufficient reason, any sort of explanation for why it is the way that it is, right? But if being were completely changeless, eternal, one, unchanging, right, you can derive all of these qualities from the fact that being is and that not being is not, right? And so the truth maintains that being is and not being is not, but the path of falsity or opinion says that both being and not being are, right? And that this is implied in motion. When something is in motion, it is in one place, right? And then it's not in that place, right? And so you have going into being, right? Things come into existence and they pass away, right? Some people think, there are lots of different answers. So like one really basic question that you could ask about Parmenides' poem, right, is you could be like, well, how many paths are there, right? Here are some answers you could give. You could say two, right? Why are there two paths? Well, the goddess says there are two paths. There's the path of truth and there's the path of doxa, right? Those seem like two paths. But you might also say, well, there's only one path, right? Reality is essentially one, unchanging, eternal, there are no parts, right? Accordingly, we could never conceive of the fact that there are two paths. And this is reflected in the fact that the goddess says that the second path is false, right? There are some interesting readings that say that there are actually three paths, right? What does that mean? Well, there's the path of the truth, the perspective of the truth, where everything is one. There is the perspective of opinion or doxa, where the many, there's the, sort of like the opinions of the many and belief in the many, right? But then also, perhaps, there's the perspective that the goddess gives you, right? The one where you can see the one and the many, right? At the same time. And so it's a really interesting question to ask, how many paths are there? What does it mean to say that this path is false, right? To what extent is this presentation, which seems to give you many paths, right, consistent with the philosophical beliefs that are being articulated here, right? Okay, let's move on to Zeno now, right? One way that you might characterize the difference between Parmenides and Zeno's approaches is that Parmenides gives something like a positive argument, right? He says reality is this way, where it's single, unitary, unchanging, forever the same, right? And that argument is really based in the principle of sufficient reason, as we said, right? If not being is not, how could you explain changes, right? It seems like change requires the idea of something not being what it was. But if not being is not, right, then that path is blocked for you, right? The way that Zeno works is Zeno works kind of the opposite way, and Plato in particular characterizes him this way, where Zeno attempts to give kind of negative proofs of Parmenides' hypothesis, right? Zeno says in the little bit that we have from Plato, who we're going to learn more about later, right? Zeno and Parmenides have this dynamic where Zeno is Parmenides' student and younger lover, right? This is somewhat common for the ancient Greeks, right? And Zeno sort of sees that his great teacher, Parmenides, is being mocked, right? By people that do things like, ooh, like I can move my hand, right? And that proves that motion is obviously real and that you are essentially full of BS, right? That was sort of the implication. And so Zeno wanted to show not the absurdity of Parmenides' view, but the absurdity of our own everyday view, that motion is real. And that's really fascinating. And he actually provides some really, really fascinating and fundamental mathematical ideas in his pursuit of disproving the existence of motion. these paradoxes, right, they get a lot more attention very many centuries later in the modern period, where we have sort of like more advanced mathematical tools. We come to appreciate, wow, these are really, really sophisticated arguments that Zeno was providing, right? Now, I don't want to get into all of his arguments because there are many. And really, I want to discuss one of them in more depth, and then you can kind of see, others' uh, relation to the first one. We'll see in just a minute. So you might think of Zeno's paradox as saying something like this. Number one, you cannot travel an infinite distance in finite time. Right? Zeno thinks that you're going to grant this, right? If an infinite number is bigger than a finite number, right, there are very many finite numbers that I cannot travel in, any finite amount of time, right? Like I can't get to the other side of the planet in less than an hour, right? Um, so that seems true that you definitely, if you couldn't travel even this finite distance in that amount of time, then you definitely cannot travel an infinite distance in that finite time, right? This is the idea. Zeno thinks, okay, you'll grant that, right? What? Oh, that was supposed to be an M, not two I's, I see. So second step of the arguments, right? All instances of motion involve traversing an infinite distance in finite time, right? So what you in the first case were sort of agreeing with, right, that that's ridiculous, right? You could never go an infinite distance in finite time. Zeno is now saying all accounts of motion involve believing that you can travel an infinite distance in finite time, right? And he concludes that in 3, motion is unreal, right? Okay, what is the argument for number 2? Well, chart out like a little number line, right? From x to y, right? Well, say this is t0, t1, t2, t3, t4, etc. Right? Okay, so say that there's some distance that you need to cover. Call that distance the relationship between x and y, right? You start out with the distance. You can take this, make it any number you want, right? So for our purposes, let's do 1 meter, right? There's 1 meter distance separating x and y, right? Zeno says you have to travel an infinite distance and you will never, in fact, reach y, right? Why is that the case? Well, Zeno says, okay, to traverse the full distance of 1 meter, right, you have to traverse half of that distance at half of a meter, right, 0.5 m, right? And if the distance between the two was set at t0, right, time 0, then traveling this 0.5 meters, we can say takes place at t1, right? You took your first step, you got halfway there, right? Easy peasy. Take your next step, you get halfway there, right? You go 0.25 meters, right? You're now at t2. You go halfway there, you're at point, 1, 2, whatever, right? You're on to the next one, and it goes on forever. You can take t up to whatever position you would like, right? It could be t1000 or t99, right? It will still never involve traversing the complete distance of 1 meter, right? So really what Zeno's argument relies on is its problems about the continuum, right? We're essentially using a little number line here, right? And what Zeno is demonstrating is that we can think about any number line as containing an infinite number of points, right? So if that's true, then to go any distance, to traverse any line, then implies going an infinite distance, right? This is why Zeno says, take as much time as you want, you will never get there, right? So that's a very interesting mathematical insight, right? Similarly, there is an account of what he calls Achilles and the tortoise, right? So you might say, okay, they start a race, right? Achilles is trying to catch the tortoise, right? Tortoise starts out 1 meter ahead, and you can do the same thing here, right? Where we can say this initial starting point is t0, and then the first movement is at t1, second movement t2, third movement t3, and so on. Even if the turtle is slower than Achilles, right? Achilles has to traverse half of the distance an infinite number of times, and so he never catches up to the tortoise, right? It's once again, take as many of these t's as you want, right? You don't reach the tortoise. So you can see the relationship to the previous paradox. Another argument that Zeno gives that I think is quite interesting is he says, okay, imagine you throw a javelin, right? That javelin is in motion, right? It's going various distances, or at least so you say, right? And what Zeno argues is, once again, divide up that period into time slices, go t1, t2, t3, and so on, right? And snapshot any of those you like, right? And the javelin is not in motion, right? What does that show? Well, it shows that motion is unreal, or at least that is what Zeno claims, right? I'm going to cut things off here. There's definitely a lot more that could be said about these highly interesting and philosophically sophisticated arguments. However, I'm really more interested in seeing what you have to say. A lot of the time, Zeno's paradoxes in particular really get people going, right? Do you believe it? Do you not believe it? I'm really excited to see your discussion forum responses and see what you think. Okay, thanks so much. Have a great week. Bye.